Our next witness is Robert Bowlsby, representing the Big 12 Conference. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Commissioner Bowlsby. Thank you for being here today as well. And you've heard the routine. We're going to ask you to share with us for 5 minutes or so, and then I'm sure there'll be questions.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Thank you for having me here. I have to say I probably am prepared to answer whatever questions that you may have. I wasn't prepared for Professor Weinstein's thinly veiled advocacy for SMU, but that notwithstanding, we are here to talk about the departure of the University of Oklahoma and the University of Texas at Austin, and it represents a major and perpetual blow to the remaining members of the Big 12. There is no question about that, and to intercollegiate athletics more generally. We've heard there are currently 5 autonomy conference members in the state of Texas. Baylor, Texas Tech University, and TCU could be in jeopardy of losing that status. I have no reason to say that at the present time, but that status is an NCAA governance status that was negotiated and was based upon our membership and the profile of the members that we had. So it's possible that could come into question. I do want to make the distinction between that and any status we may have within the college football playoff. The autonomy conferences do enjoy revenue sharing stipulations that last year yielded about $75 million to our league, and that status and that revenue comes regardless of whether or not we're in the playoff. We all share equally. All 5 autonomy conferences receive the same amount of money. The participating teams do receive about $6 million additional for playing in the semifinals and an additional $8 million for playing in the national championship game. This is a very awkward time in intercollegiate athletics, has been noted earlier, and for the reasons that were noted. And on top of it all, we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic that is now back upon us, and it feels very much reminiscent of last year in that we, with 1 month to go until the football season, really don't know what all of our policies are going to be around the pandemic and access to our facilities. All of these matters press on the 2 universities that are leaving, and they press on the 8 that are remaining. The 2 that are leaving, however, have done so without notification to us and with no accounting for their reasons. If the inclusion of OU and UT in the SEC is intended to disrupt intercollegiate athletics, it will certainly accomplish that. The balance within and among conferences fluctuates from time to time, but generally the environment contributes to high-level competition, conference-wide, and meaningful and interesting interconference competition among conferences as well. In short, the distribution of top programs among our nation's conferences has provided outstanding competition and highly favorable balance. Conferences have been the preferred structures for decades to produce regular season competition, to develop and build fierce rivalries, to distribute revenue, to facilitate shared vitality, and to provide governance structures to which we all agree to conform. These functions and traditions are now in doubt. With the disruption, the economies of the 8 remaining Big 12 members are jeopardized, particularly the 3 universities in the state of Texas. The Perryman report details the extensively negative financial impact that this departure will have, but it does not seek to detail the points that others will make today regarding student recruitment, bond ratings, long-range planning, research funding, the innate codependencies that are present in college athletics conferences extend far beyond the playing fields. Mutual commitments are made that rely on years and decades of history and relationships with many millions of dollars in the balance for these three schools. Notwithstanding the obvious breach of trust, the Universities of Oklahoma and the University of Texas at Austin have violated the very bylaws they helped to construct. With the approval of our board, the remaining 8 members, I notified both institutions of what I believe to be that violation. Both of them have participated in the development and codification of conference bylaws, including sections regarding membership commitments, notices of intent to withdraw, and provisions describing how any such withdrawal might take place. It only remains now to be seen if they will continue to ignore the other agreed upon withdrawal procedures. It is also a matter of record that our media rights are shared among our 10 members. This is an irrevocable grant of rights that was written, edited, and adopted by the then OU and UT general counsels in conjunction with Big 12 counsel. Madam Chair, I know I'm running a little long here, but I beg your indulgence to
I'll give you a couple more minutes, but
complete my statement.
Wind it up.
So knowing what they have said about their adherence to the grant of rights and seeing what has happened with the remaining elements of the departure, one can understand our skepticism about the sincerity of their now stated intentions to play with us and participate through 24-25. Under the best of circumstances, the transitions of institutions from one conference to another are messy and heartbreaking. They always are, and they always will be. I acknowledge that institutions have every right to envision their future and to act upon those visions. Regrettably and inappropriately, these 2 universities chose to ignore their prior commitments and instead moved ahead to deceive and undermine the institutions to which they pledged their loyalty. Past practice and credible governance documents might logically cause conference members to assume an ongoing participation of these 2 members, or at least to be of the mind that they shouldn't have to guess what the plans of the schools are. Had a leak of information not occurred on July 21st, 2020, the University of Oklahoma and the University of Texas at Austin would still have access to proprietary information within the Big 12 Conference and would still be participating in our meetings.
Okay.
Fully aware that they were going to leave. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure some of the rest of what you were going to say is probably going to come to light as questions are asked.
And my full statement, Madam Chair, is submitted for the record.
Thank you, and we'll make sure all members get that. Can you walk us through this cease and desist letter that you sent to ESPN?
Let me say at the outset that I have spent a number of conversations with representatives of ESPN, and we have agreed to not escalate this publicly. It's in neither party's best interest to do so, but if I may, let it suffice to say we became aware of information that at least one and perhaps more conferences were meddling with our members, and that there was some indication that ESPN had a participation in it, and that was the reason for the letter.
So looking beyond 2025, the conference has many options as to how it could proceed. What are some of those options, and how will those affect potential TV deals?
We estimate that the OU and Texas participation in our television rights agreement is something approaching 50% of the value. So last year, in a COVID year, we distributed about $35 million in distributable revenue. Of that, $28 million was television revenue. The rest was NCAA revenue, bowl game revenue, CFP revenue. So about $28 million of it, and so you could roughly look at least $14 million per school in a new day without similar replacements to the 2 that are leaving.
Okay. Okay, Senator Hinojosa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. I don't want to get into the legal aspects of the agreement that the Big 12 has, but realignments have happened in the past, have they not?
It has.
And every time they happen, they do disrupt conferences.
That is true.
And many times these realignments are driven by TV and revenue that it's earned by the conferences.
In the past, I think what you say is correct. In the past, the capture of cable households was really the coin of the realm. The television revenue from linear cable is substantial, but what we find ourselves now with is a shrinking cable environment that was once almost 110 million households. It's now in the low 80s, and it's forecast to go below 50 million households. And so the television ecosystem is changing dramatically. The migration to streaming and to digital consumption is well underway, particularly with young people. And so as an example, the Big Ten annexation of Maryland and Rutgers was entirely about capturing cable households in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, New Jersey, and to some extent the New York area.
So the different conferences are finding ways to respond to the changing taste of viewers and the different events of delivering the football games to the public.
The technology is evolving very quickly. The funding has not evolved as quickly. The built-in model in cable television is that many people are charged for services they don't consume. And there is no place that is more true than in sports television. And so the broadcasters are making a very large amount of money because they're part of basic cable from people who don't even watch the games. That's all going to go away. In the future, the people that are going to consume those games are going to purchase them on an a la carte basis. If you want to have Peacock television, you pay $4.99 a month for it, or if you want Hulu to get the Pac-12 network, you can do that. It will all be done on an a la carte basis. And so the funding model is completely upside down at this point in time. And streaming and digital in the space of live sports has not recovered in terms of the finances of it. And it likely will be a while before it does.
And the revenue that has been received by the different conferences, 5 power conferences, out of the five power conferences, the Big 12 has the lowest revenue that any compared to the other 4 conferences.
That's not correct, Senator.
What do you all rank? Big 12 ranks?
The Big 12 is third in revenue per member, which is the way we manage it. Next year, our distribution will be right at $40 million per school, plus or minus, and I'm quite sure that'll put us in third position, ahead of the ACC and the Pac-12, and behind the SEC and the Big Ten.
And in terms of the revenue, as you know, as you said, technology is changing, and the way viewers view football games and the way they charge. Did the Big 12 was it aggressive enough in trying to adjust, knowing that the realignment was always a possibility?
Well, we negotiated a 12-year agreement in 2011 that started in 2012. It runs 4 more years. So, and it is half with ESPN, 52% ESPN, and 48% Fox Sports. And so, you know, we talk to our partners with regularity about the marketplace and our position in the marketplace, but typically those negotiations don't take place until late in the term of the contract. In ours, I think we have a 6-month window before the end of the contract where both parties need to engage.
Just from the information that I've been able to read, it seems to me that the Big 12 was not aggressive enough and anticipate there was always a possibility of realigning, and with the increase in revenue from TV, that you would have that Big 12 has expires in 2025, I think.
That's correct.
Okay? And they refuse to negotiate or extend it.
Well, we have those conversations all the time. We made no formal proposal and they made no formal declination. We have those conversations repeatedly throughout the term of the contract.
So some estimates that I've seen show that University of Texas, for example, probably makes somewhere between $26 to $40 million increase per year from joining the Southeastern Conference. Would you agree with that?
I haven't seen those numbers, Senator.
Well, would you agree that there will be an increase in revenue to University of Texas?
Based upon what those are mostly extrapolated figures. The conferences typically don't put out a whole lot of details on that, but the things you see in trade magazines and in the media, their revenue seems to be, I think it was reported at around $45 million per member last year, which would put it, well, higher than ours. In the case of the University of Texas's case, they receive about something approaching $20 million a year from the Longhorn Network, and so I don't know what arrangements they may have made to take the Longhorn Network with them or to dismantle the Longhorn Network. We have not been a party to those discussions.
And would you agree that most of the football conferences, athletic conferences, they don't last forever. They're only for a certain period of time.
Well, we're the youngest, that's for sure. We just celebrated our 25th year, but the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 are all over 100 years old.
And some of the teams that used to be members of the Big 12 have also left, like Nebraska, for example, moved to the Big Ten.
Nebraska, Colorado, Missouri, and Texas A&M have all left.
And my last question is just an observation. It seems to me that some of the other conferences have been a lot more aggressive in preparing for possibility of increasing the number of teams to join the conference, focusing more on the changes that are taking place in technology to increase on the revenue for the schools.
I disagree with that assertion.
And the contract that Big 12 has in terms of TV rights are different than other football conferences in that, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the Big 12, the schools own the rights to TV, not the conference itself?
The conference owns the rights.
Okay.
We have a grant of rights that was executed consistent with the beginning of our contract that delegates to me and conference staff under the supervision of the board of directors the negotiation with our TV partners.
How does that compare to, let's say, the Southeastern Conference TV rights?
They have the same, they do it through different mechanisms. I'd say each of the five are different, although two of us have grants of rights. But they each have their own mechanism, but all of them delegate the negotiation and management of the television contracts to the Commissioner's office.
And right now, the Southeastern Conference receives higher revenue than the Big 12.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Senator Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with the change you've been talking about with the cable, that was very enlightening. I really hadn't understood that, the cable versus streaming and people being basically subsidizing some channels they weren't even watching. How long has it been that the Big 12 only had 10 teams in it?
It was right prior to the time that I came on as commissioner. Two of the schools left in 2010, two left in 2011, And I wasn't there, so I'm doing this mostly from historical memory. And then two members, TCU and West Virginia, were added in 11 and brought the total to 10 teams.
So we've been the Big 12, even though we've only had 10 for over 10 years.
Yeah, it's a quirk of athletics. The Big 10 has 14 and the Big 12 has 10.
Okay. Have you all tried to recruit more teams? We've had this discussion. You've heard the economists talk about bringing in some big markets, and have you tried?
Yeah, we went through a very open process where we interviewed leadership from 18 different institutions, and ultimately the board decided not to expand. But we went through a very transparent process where everybody at the other institutions knew just exactly what was going on, and you know, those are, as a commissioner, you never want to hear somebody's looking at your members, but taking a forthright approach to it is what we thought that we needed to do. And so we went to the schools we wanted to talk with, told them that we were going to go through this process, and then did so. In the end, we didn't add anybody, but that was the process we went through.
So like it's been mentioned, like, for example, University of Houston, large market, TV market, large population. Why would the teams not want to do that? Was it because of recruiting issues? Was it splitting the money by another team?
Well, I think each institution probably makes its own decisions on those things, but perhaps if you look at it just from a cable television standpoint, those are households in Houston that aren't additive because the University of Texas gets into there. Other of our members, Texas Tech, Baylor, they all get into that county and into that TV market. So you're not adding the cable television business is priced in market and out of market. And so I was at the Big Ten at the University of Iowa when the Big Ten network was started. At that time, and these numbers have changed, an out of market subscription. That is to say, not in one of your footprint states, was worth a dime, was worth 10 or 11 cents. An in-market subscription was worth $1.20. Wow. So you begin to do the math, and it makes a lot of sense to have in-market participants in areas where there's great cable density. We already had all of the households in Houston as part of our in-market capture.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Birdwell, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, real quickly, I read your testimony. You mentioned an autonomy conference. Would you define an autonomy conference and what the other schools that are not the 5 universities, what type of conference they're in, and what those functionally mean?
Well, autonomy conferences are commonly referred to synonymous with power conferences. It was a designation within the NCAA that was developed, I guess it's been 7 or 8 years ago now. The 5 conferences that are now designated as autonomy conferences were unhappy that we were in the excuse me, we were in the midst of having 350 members in Division I decide our fate on a lot of different issues, and particularly on issues in the sport of football. And so a subdivision was started. It's constituted by some weighted voting within the NCAA Council. It is represented by the number of presidents that we have on the NCAA board and the Board of Governors. There are certain of NCAA rules that we can act on as autonomy members and thereby affect rules changes without going to the 350 members that are different sizes, different shapes. Some are public, some are private, some have graduate programs, some have nursing schools. You know, it's apples and oranges and bananas, and when you try and make reasonable rules and regulations, it's very difficult to do with 350 disparate schools. So the autonomy designation is a subdivision of Division I, wherein we can control a fair amount of our own rules, and that's particularly true in football.
You have
The extension from that, the extension from that is into the college football playoff, where when we began that process, there was an identification that the SEC had won 7 of the 8 previous national championships, and there was recognition that most of the competitive equity in college football resided in those 5 conferences: the ACC, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, and Pac-12.
Okay. When did the Big 12 send the notice of extension for the membership or media rights to the member schools?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Senator.
Let me, without belaboring, in my visitation with various folks over the last 10 days, my understanding is that the 2 schools in question wanted to explore their options and did not wish to extend their obligation in 25 and beyond years, because they wanted to take the time now to look at those options. So something had to inform them that the Big 12 was seeking to renew the contract at this juncture in 21 for 25 and beyond. So when did that notice to the Big 12 as a conference, when did that notice go to the member universities to say, we want you to extend television and the other media rights at this juncture in 21 for 25? When did that notice go out?
There was no such notice. No, we talk about these things all the time.
I understand. I mean,
There was no such notice.
What you've
went out.
just said changes the dynamics of what I, and I assume other members on this dais have been told.
There was no such notice sent out.
So no such notice has been given to extend, request for an extension of the contract with the member schools. No such notice was given.
The only time we would do that would be when we were about to enter a legitimate negotiation that both sides agreed to,
Okay, well,
and we don't have that.
what would be your normal time frame for the preparatory discussions to begin for an extension?
6 months before the extension's over. It may be 8 months, it may be 9 months. I haven't looked at it for a while, but it's within the last year before the expiration of the contract.
Okay, so if it's normally done in the last year before the expiration of the contract, if a member team at that normal time frame said, we don't want to participate, when do the schedules get written for conference and non-conference play?
You don't know
What's that delta that says, if you're gonna leave, I gotta know it here, so that the televised games next year, the following, what is the lead time you normally need for conference affiliation, not just media disbursement?
The grant of rights is for a finite period. As you've accurately identified, it ends at the end of the 24-25 sports season and school year, June 30th, 2025. There is the other governing document that we rely on is the bylaws. That is a mutually accepted and approved document that stipulates 18 months from the time of notification for an intention to move from the conference. And so it is the June 30th that is 18 months plus or minus however many months to get to June 30th is the notice period. And there is a 99-year commitment that all 10 members agreed to in 2010 or 2011 that requires 2 years of full revenue to be relinquished upon departure from the conference.
Okay. What options are available to the remaining 8 schools based upon what you've told me? When and where is the decision point for each of the member schools to decide either the viability of the remaining 8 or for them to determine their own best course of action as individual schools?
There is no drop-dead date. I'm sorry, were you not finished?
There may not be a drop-dead date, but what is the season of time that the pressure on the schools to make that decision is going to occur?
Well, it certainly would occur at the end of the current contract, but we expect to deal with it long before that.
Right.
I think that, these things don't happen overnight. Conversations take time. I think there are options for us to partner with other conferences. There may be opportunity for mergers. There may be opportunities to add members. There may be other opportunities that are currently unforeseen. We are in, as has been noted, the multitude and severity of the challenges that are out there right now is likely to cause lots of changes, and it's not just about changes in conference membership, but certainly that's a part of it. So, I think we're going to try and move as methodically and as smartly as we possibly can. We want to make sure that we optimize the options that each institution has for itself, but we also believe that the 8 of us staying together is probably our best approach in the near term. And so that aspirationally is what we've discussed so far. We'll have to see what comes of the various discussions I described. Okay. But I think our 8 members are steadfast in moving forward and looking for opportunities that benefit all of us.
Understand. Okay, last question, Madam Chair.
Take your time.
You had mentioned, Commissioner Bowlsby, that the Big 12 had, over the last, however many years ago it was, that it reviewed 18 teams for expanded membership. How long does that process take for a team to decide whether or not it wishes to expand?
A team or a conference?
Before you answer, let me tell you what I'm driving at. I was told by leadership of the university system that they wanted time to explore their options. That decision has been made in less than 10 days. How long did you give your 18 schools that you gave consideration to? How long did the conference take? And how long did those 18 schools get to make a decision? Was it 10 days? 10 days?
No, it was longer than that. We did in-person interviews with each of them. They had to submit to us an intention to join if invited. There were some other legal documents and the exchange of expectations as to what you could expect coming in from a financial standpoint. Typically, additions are made on a gradual basis. They don't come in at the same distributable revenue as the people that are currently in the business. So I would say our process with 18 schools took 3 months,
Okay.
8 weeks,
Thank you.
somewhere in there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Springer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sort of following up on that, questions there. When you invited these 18 schools in, did they present to the board of directors, or did they present to an executive committee of a couple?
It was a combination. We had presidents involved. We had conference staff, but it would be, I think, fair to say that those were preliminary processes. The board was going to make those decisions without any question.
In one of the places I read, and please correct this if it was wrong, was that the ESPN contract that was under would allow for expansion without the dilution of monies going to each of the 10 universities, that the other 2, if added to, would get about the same amount of money. Is that correct?
That was originally in our contract, Senator. We took it out in exchange for some other considerations around the conference championship game and arrangement we have with ESPN Plus, where we do about 600 events a year on digital cable.
So was
or
that taken
digital.
out when the expansion did not happen?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So you said you were given other incentives in lieu of letting that piece of that contract go. And my question was, is that at the same time period that you then decided not to expand to 12, or was that 2 years later, 2 years earlier?
I'm going to need to think about that a little bit. I think they're about concurrent, but I would have to consult the
And that
calendar.
sort of gets to be somewhat of the questioning on this is, have we reached a spot, that ESPN is becoming the size that it is dictating to the universities what they can and can't do, therefore without TV contracts?
Well, it's a rhetorical question that I don't have an answer to, but I can tell you when we were in the throes of talking about a conference expansion, it was just one of the many ways in which we've tiptoed around the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma over the years, because they were not in favor of expanding.
So and therefore when the ESPN contract was redone, it in lieu could have potentially, there was 18, but clearly I think the Texas school that we're all talking about, or know that we know that was included in that, was University of Houston. And therefore the dollars that they lost, and I believe, if I've read correctly, that in the AAC that they get about $7 million a year, whereas they would get about $35 to $40 million if they'd been part of the Big 12.
I'd say that those figures are
So the 10 schools
accurate.
in the Big 12 received other incentives not to expand that at the same time also affected a public university in the state of Texas.
Yeah, well, we're benefited by slicing the pie fewer directions. That's correct.
Okay. You said that, and I want to make sure I got it right, that the effect of the 8 schools that remain will probably be about a $20 to $30 million loss. I think if I heard you said you thought it would be about $14 or $15 million on revenue if it was just the 8 based on the loss of OU in Texas.
No, I think I said that the television revenue is about $28 million a year.
And would drop to 14? Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it has been estimated, and I don't, you never know these things until you go negotiate, but it's been estimated that up to 50% of the TV value could be embedded in the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma's value, and certainly viewership numbers would bear that out, not just when they're playing each other, but when they're playing all of our members as well.
Right. Does the Big 12 have a large amount of vendor contracts or endorsement contracts? Or are those all cheese?
We have a relationship with a company called Learfield Sports. They do sponsorships for us that yields us approximately $1.5 million a year in sponsor revenue.
And that's split between the 10, so that's probably not substantial then?
Yeah, well, it goes into our revenue distribution.
Cover costs.
Our budget, we have 32 full-time equivalencies. Our budget pre-pandemic was about $29 million a year. And then everything, we distribute 94.5% of what we take in to our members.
And for the 8 members that are left, if they have a 14 million, 15 million with some potentially contracts or endorsement deals that they may potentially lose, I mean, the only way for them to stay at the same status or performance and investment in facilities is either to raise the fees to students or ticket pricing, or to cover that by cutting other costs of programs, and maybe even eliminating, losing, programs, whether it's tennis, soccer, baseball, whatever that is.
Raising more money or cutting overhead. That's the long and the short of it.
Okay, and then the last one of the things I've heard about is the challenge of recruiting for Big 12 schools versus the SEC schools. What school had the #1 recruiting class last year? Was that the University of Oklahoma?
Well, they're projected to have the #1 class this coming year. I don't recall if they were #1 last year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before I recognize the next senator to ask questions, and we'll get to everybody, I want to recognize the House members that I'm seeing out there in the audience. Representative Darby, and I see Representative Murphy, and I saw Leach over there a minute ago. I don't know if I'm missing somebody, but I want to thank you all for coming and participating. I'm sorry that you're not able to have a hearing over on your side, but it is my understanding, as I mentioned before, that you can't have a hearing if you don't have a quorum present. And there is no quorum present, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman
Yes.
Kieran? Sorry to hear that. I wish that you had had that opportunity.
I do as well.
Senator Springer, I'm going to assume that you were not finished with your question, so I'm
One
going to
last one, if
recognize
you wouldn't mind, then
Go right
I
ahead.
will be done on this. We talk about the effect. Have we ever seen one that affected to this magnitude other universities in realignment?
Well, the difference between this one and any of the others is they've come off the top of the food chain. The others that have moved have typically been the Rutgers and the Marylands that were down in the ranks a little bit. But
Yeah, I know when UNT moved from the Sun Belt to Conference USA, Sun Belt folks weren't hurt as much.
I draw no conclusions
Yeah,
on that.
well,
Senator.
I'll pick on my own alma mater there, but, because I'm trying to understand the magnitude. I mean, it's one thing to say that, some other schools may lose a few $100,000 here and there, but when we talk to this magnitude, I'm trying to understand the magnitude of the 8 institutions left in the Big 12 versus what has happened when other universities have left another program, if there's anywhere even to the scale of this.
You can ask the 3 athletic directors that are here, but I would venture a guess that their largest crowds of the year are when Texas and Oklahoma come to town. And so it's not just the games played in Austin, it's the games played in cities and towns all across the league.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Perry, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. And I know
You're welcome.
we all wish you weren't here, but I do think you have a tall order.
No more than
I need to do a couple of things, and it's kind of in coordination with Senator Birdwell here. To be clear, and this is an important point that we all need to leave here with a full understanding. There was no communications to the 2 schools that are opting to leave prior to you. When did you first know that they were belling to the SEC?
When I landed, I was on the campus of the University of Kansas for a speaking engagement and
What day?
and
What
an
time?
event, Wednesday, July 21st.
So prior to Wednesday of July 21st, no initiation by the Big 12 to the 2 schools that, hey, an extension's coming, which is not your protocol. It's not in your bylaws. You wouldn't do it 4 years out. So there was no reason for them to, quote, come out and say, we received notice of an extension request, we're going to review our options, because that's
Senator,
the narrative that's
we
been
wouldn't
floated.
know today if it hadn't been leaked to the
I
media.
saw your testimony, and this is important because the narrative that the university has used is we were contacted, i.e., we were considered for this consideration, and we want to give ourselves some options. So the truth of the matter is, there was never any communication. There wasn't time for the communication. Your bylaws didn't require that communication, correct?
I don't understand the question.
There was no
Senator.
communications to UT or Austin that would give them the venue to come out and say, we've been asked for an extension of our TV contract that's up in 25. We want to explore options because
We talked about television matters
Well, I wanna be
all the
clear.
time.
Is
but
the narrative false?
There was no missive, no memo, no direction, no ultimatum that we needed to have their grant of rights right now.
So it's fair to say you were totally surprised.
Completely surprised.
Did you ever, or any, and this will be asked amongst the other people, specifically Texas, but were you aware of any ongoing conversations or discussions at any level with any organization, including SPN, NCAA, about a potential move prior to that day?
I'm not aware of anything prior to that day.
Back to so I've established, I think, pretty clearly that the narrative that we were just notified and we were going to exercise is a false narrative, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. On the 2010 and 2011, that's when we added 2 and took 4 away, basically. Do you know when the Longhorn Network was created?
I do not. Let me, I guess it must have been 2011, because I believe it was a 20-year agreement, and it expires in 2031.
So I'm just going to ask your experience. You had 4 Bell, and you went after 18 to hopefully fill 4 spots, basically, to get us up to the 12, I assume. But did the, quote, Longhorn Network come up in conversations that that's one reason we don't want to play with you guys? You know, I can make some assumptions based on Southwest Conference play moving into the Big 12. Some of the teams exiting were just kind of tired of the big fish in the pond, so to speak. But what was the Longhorn Network a contributing factor to those 4 exiting teams?
I don't know, Senator. I wasn't the commissioner then. I was minding my own business at Stanford University, and I don't really know what the...
Because I too share with my colleagues, there's a responsibility at the conference level. And I heard you had 18 teams on the hook, so to speak, trying to pull them in. What were the reasons for not coming in?
I think that there was a strong feeling that we could do some things to overcome not having divisions. And if you get to 12 or larger, you're going to play in divisions. We instead decided to implement a postseason championship game, matching our best 2 teams, which is unprecedented in other conferences, but also guarantees a great game. And indeed, we've had those great games. And so it was a process that the board went through in conjunction with the athletic directors that said, not now.
Okay.
And